I welcome you to my registration seminar, which is titled Antecedents and Outcomes of Humble Leadership Among Indian Corporate Managers. I have structured this presentation into 5 parts. The first part deals with the origins of humility and humbleness concepts. Part 2 deals with definitions of humble leadership and its related dimensions. Part 3 deals with bibliometric analysis and review of literature. Part 4 deals with gaps in literature, and Part 5 presents the tentative research model. Etymologically, humility is a noun that has its origins in Old French and Latin languages, which mean modesty, sweetness, lowness, etc. The Oxford Dictionary also defines it as the quality of being humble or having a modest or low view of one's importance, whereas humbleness is an adjective and has usage in the languages as on the ground or from the earth, submissive, etc. Earlier, research scholars considered humility a disposition, but later it was identified as a personality trait, and recent scholars consider it an interpersonal characteristic. Humility has a lot of mention in organizational behavior, leadership, and positive organizational scholarship topics, because a lot of importance has been garnered to virtuousness and other positive states recently. Humility has also been assigned the status of a meta virtue, which gives birth to other virtues, as it leads to positive deviance across individuals, followers, and organizational outcomes. In Indian philosophy, humility has a special place. In fact, the Hindi equivalent of humility is Namrata, Vinay, Vineet, etc., which are popular names of people since 1880 in India. The Sankhya philosophy concept of Trigunas talks of how Rajasic people are full of pride and narcissism, Tamasics are inert, and Sattvic ones are balanced with displays of humility. The famous scripture Bhagavad Gita too counts humility as the first and the most important of the 20 noble virtues. It is evident that the Western research lacks an Indian, more comprehensive perspective on humility. Humble leadership has garnered a lot of attention in all forms of business and management literature, including art and humor. The exhibit shows one such example in the form of a cartoon. Humble leadership in scholarly literature is a subset of humility literature among morally oriented leadership styles. It is referring to viewing oneself accurately, providing an appreciation of others' strengths and contributions, and modeling teachability. Humble leadership has been defined by many scholars in varied ways. Moyes et al. In 2005 gave a very comprehensive definition involving authenticity of humility. But the most widely accepted definition was given by Owens, Johnson, and Mitchell in 2013. Similarly, the components of humble leadership have been identified by several researchers. The most prominent and comprehensive list was given by Ock and others' work in 2015, with as many as 9 components. Some concepts that are similar to humble leadership are self-esteem, which is mainly a predictor of humility and how much individuals hold a positive or negative views of themselves. Second is modesty, which is withholding all positive information about oneself. Emotional intelligence. It refers to accuracy in appraising and expressing emotions, which has 4 parts: emotional awareness, emotional facilitation of thought, emotional understanding, and emotional management. Core self-evaluation. It is a higher-order trait that gives a comprehensive view of self and comprises 4 lower-order constructs of self-esteem, generalized self-efficacy, internal locus of control, and emotional stability. Next is openness to experience. It's about how someone is insightful and imaginative and appreciates the art, emotions, novelty, unusual ideas, adventure, etc. Honesty humility is a part of Hexaco model with 5 components of sincerity, fairness, absence of greed, modesty, and honesty. Similarly, learning goal orientation is given by Dweck, the growth mindset concept of having an all-adaptive approach to task situations with motivation to understand and master the tasks. Conscientiousness is a primary trait among 16 PF inventory given by Cattle and Mead. It has two dimensions, responsibility dependability aspect and achievement striving aspect. Some other related concepts are narcissism, which is self-promotion and an inflated sense of self. Machiavellianism refers to the willingness to do whatever is required, good or bad, to have it one's way. And such people are known to have a lack of empathy. Myers-Briggs type indicator, it constitutes 4 types of personality traits, extroversion versus introversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judgment versus perception. So almost 4 kinds of combinations have been found to be closely related to leader humility. Other morally oriented leadership styles are authentic leadership, ethical leadership, transformational leadership, and servant leadership. Humble leadership includes admitting mistakes and limitations, spotlighting followers' strengths and contributions, as well as modeling teachability. Authentic leadership involves acting on one's beliefs and values and being transparent about it. Ethical leadership is conducting oneself in normatively appropriate manners through personal action and interpersonal relationships. Such leaders tend to reinforce and reward their followers suitably. Transformational leadership has 4 components: idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. Servant leadership has Judeo-Christian roots that shows dominance of motive to care, and the goal is to achieve community. The systematic literature review was conducted in 4 phases. The first phase involved a preliminary search on Google search engine. The second phase included studying reviews on humble leadership using Google Scholar. The third phase included a bibliometric analysis on various softwares like VOSviewer and BiblioShiny using reputed online databases like ProQuest, Web of Science, Scopus, EBSCO, etc. The keywords were humility or humble or humbleness or modest or modesty, and leader or leaders or leadership. The last phase involved manual screening for review papers by reading the title, abstract, and full text of the articles. 10 seminal papers were selected on the basis of novelty they added to the humble leadership literature in terms of a first comprehensive qualitative study using a thematic analysis or measure involving 5 different samples addressing important outcomes, multiphasic, multi-level, multi-source field studies, or underlying mechanisms for various important effects of humble leadership, and included new concepts like social networking being introduced in the humble leadership literature. These seminal papers belong to the last 10 years of research on humble leadership. A look at the bibliometric analysis shows that the most prominent subject category with maximum number of papers is management, followed by business and applied psychology, multidisciplinary psychology, and ethics. The most prominent authors in humble leadership are Dr. B.P. Owens, Dr. Z.X. Chen, Dr. M.P.E. Kunha, Dr. A. Rico, Dr. W.X. Liu, Dr. J.H. Mao, and Dr. L. Zhang. The number of papers on humble leadership have mainly increased since 2017. On the basis of bibliometric analysis, we find 5 kinds of clusters of papers on humble leadership. The first category is of humble leadership and its effects. The second one is the papers on employee behaviors around humble leadership. The third one is on humble leadership mechanisms. The fourth one is about outcomes of humble leadership. And the last cluster addresses papers on models of humble leadership. The literature review shows that humble leadership is considered a good form of leadership and has positive impact on followers, teams, and the organizations. There are stark differences in Western and Eastern cultures with respect to humble leadership. Followers' personality too affects the perception of leader benevolence. Leaders with gratitude are highly likely to engage in humble behaviors. Interestingly, gender correlates negatively with humility. So, male leaders are found to be less humble as compared to their female counterparts. Employees with low public service motivation are likely to respond more to humble leadership. And despite all positives, humble leadership may be seen as a weak style of leadership in highly uncertain environments. Looking at some major gaps in humble leadership literature, it is seen that there is ample research on outcomes, mediators, and moderators. But there is a need to find more antecedents of humble leadership and its related contexts. Also, measures of humble leadership in social settings are found to be inadequate as the popular ones lack the Indian philosophies of eightfold path of Buddhism, respectfulness from Islam, and indifference toward recognition, etc. There has been a lot of focus on leaders, but less on how followers create meaning of humble leadership and its effectiveness by using narratives. There's a need to understand how followers' perceptions change over a period of time. There are hardly any studies from the sample from the Indian subcontinent. Also, a bottoms-up effect of humble leadership is largely unexplored. The real-life teams have around 6 to 7 people at least, as against the 2 or 3 team members used for samples in previous studies. Also, the impact of individual differences on sense of power outcome of humble leadership is yet to be explored. Based on the research gaps, the proposed research objectives are as follows. 1. To identify the antecedents and related outcomes of humble leadership in Indian context. Understand the effect of humble leadership in Indian culture with respect to the leader's motive profile and organizational identification. To study the impact of humble leadership in the Indian context. And to develop a conceptual framework for humble leadership linking the new antecedents and their related outcomes. Here is the tentative research model with leader humility and team member humility as the antecedents, core self-evaluation as the mediator, organizational citizenship behavior and organizational deviant behavior as the outcomes, and motive profile as well as leader organizational identification as our moderators. Based on the tentative research model, these are the 12 proposed hypotheses. Thank you very much for your time. You can post your questions, comments, feedback, or suggestions in the comment section of this video.